Federico, we are back for our third special episode about WWDC. How are you doing today?
I am doing pretty well. Thank you, John. It's been fun to continue to take notes, pick and choose the sessions that I want to watch. There's just too many to watch in a single day. That's why you got to prioritize. And I try to prioritize based on the things I want to know and the things I want to talk about on the show. This one is not a session, but it's just something that I want to talk about because we're not just covering sessions. We're also discovering things as we use the betas and the new versions of Apple's operating systems. Yesterday, we talked about shortcuts for Mac and how the fact that Apple needed to recreate some automator actions allowed them in the process to bring some of those over to iOS and iPadOS. And some of those actions that iPhone and iPad users received in this process is much better and deeper integration with the file system on both iOS and iPadOS. This is the thing that we always wanted, that we've been asking for the past couple of years. We referred to this feature as bookmarks because technically that's what it's called in the system.
Right.
But really what you can do now with shortcuts in iOS 15 is you can just point the app to any folder and you can say, get the contents of this folder. And once you grant access to that directory, to that folder, access is permanent. You don't need to do any custom setup with Toolbox Pro or Scriptable. There's a new action called get contents of folder, and you pick a folder from any compatible file provider. It can be iCloud, it can be local storage, it can be something like Working Copy. And you pick a directory, you pick a folder, and every time you run the shortcut, it'll get the contents of that folder. But that's not all. This also works the other way around. So you can also save documents into a specific folder. And this is a big deal because up until iOS 14, shortcuts could only get read and write access programmatically, and by that I mean without showing you any user interface, to the iCloud Drive /shortcuts subfolder. Right? It was limited to its own sandbox in iCloud Drive. Now, you can pick any folder you want and you can save documents or retrieve documents without having to interact manually with the file speaker. And this is a big deal because it's first of all, it's consistent with how automation works on the Mac, right? You can pick any folder, you can say, save documents here, get documents there, it doesn't matter. But also it simplifies a lot of file-based workflows on iPhone and especially on iPad. And I'm loving how I can simplify my shortcuts to take advantage of all this. Have you seen the video that I shared yesterday on Twitter, John?
Yes, I have. It's that's fantastic. I mean, I think this is the kind of thing that you run into a lot with shortcuts. And I know I just probably most recently ran into this with something that's very simple, which was just trying to save text files into a local Obsidian folder that I've been, that I was setting up for WWDC just last weekend. And it's not like Toolbox Pro is difficult to use, but it's just an added step and added friction, and the kind of tool that, as much as I love it, I don't think that it's a pro feature, right? It's a power user app, and I don't think a lot of beginner shortcut users would necessarily feel comfortable going with something like Toolbox Pro right out of the box, but they might be more comfortable using what Apple's built, and I think these actions work perfectly well that way.
Right. And this is exactly why I'm happy that I've decided to embrace the Obsidian lifestyle. The fact that Obsidian, as my note-taking app of choice where I'm storing all my research and all my writing right now, it's entirely based on the file system, right? And an Obsidian Vault is just a folder containing markdown files, and in my case, also screenshots, images. Because of this, I don't have to wait for, and I kind of figured this was actually part of my decision to use Obsidian. I don't have to wait for Obsidian to add support for shortcuts actions in iOS 15. I can just use Apple's new files actions already to speed up my workflow with Obsidian, because Obsidian is just a front end for the file system, basically. And so the video that I shared on Twitter, it shows you, first of all, the new image OCR capabilities of shortcuts
Right.
based on the vision framework. Shortcuts can now extract text from an image. And I realized as I was taking screenshots of sessions, right, that I was also renaming those images manually. Usually I would type in like the name of the topic, like Safari or iPad,
Right.
and then add a space and then add a descriptive file name, like, I don't know, shortcuts, context menu on the Mac, something like that. But I realized most of the time, the session slide that I was capturing with the screenshot, it already contained some valuable information that described the image itself toward the top of the slide.
Right.
As a heading.
Right. Enough to jog your memory, if nothing else, right?
Exactly. And so I figured, wouldn't it be fun if shortcuts could auto-name this image by extracting the text from the slide? And that's what I did. So I put together this shortcut that lets me pick a photo and then finds the first couple of lines of text and offers them as a default file name. So I can just, add in something like iPad or Safari or, home screen, for example. And then it saves me a lot of time because everything else is already inserted by the system.
And you could even drop like a date stamp in there, I guess, too, right?
Yeah.
Which would be super easy to do.
I could do all kinds of things.
Yeah, exactly.
All kinds of things. Yeah.
There are a lot of scanner apps that have done this in the past. I know Genius Scan.
Right.
Genius Scan does something similar. Prismo does some of these things. Live Scan is another app that came out recently that's specializes in capturing text. Because I think a lot of this was, these APIs were updated last year by Apple, but they weren't available in shortcuts. They were just available to third-party developers, and now they're in shortcuts as well, which is great.
Yeah. But then the real trick is, because of the new file system integration, what I can do with this image is I can save it in a specific
wherever
folder
you want.
in my Obsidian setup, right? It can be any folder. And in my case, it's just a subfolder inside my WWDC 2021 project in Obsidian. And at the end of the shortcut, I can paste the reference to that file inside of Obsidian, and that reference is a valid link to the image, because the image, again, it's just stored in files, and Obsidian is a front end for files. And so I went from a screenshot to a renamed image that is linked in my Markdown document in 3 seconds, and I didn't have to do any weird like JavaScript or use a third-party app. It's all done natively with these new files actions. Now, if you consider that this is going to work for any folder, this is going to work for saving files, for retrieving files, for listing the entire contents of a folder, this is going to be one of the key features of shortcuts this year for anyone who works on an iPad, especially. Yeah. It's going to be a real time saver.
Absolutely. It's real file management built into the system, which is going to be terrific. And as we talked about on the last episode, a lot of this is coming to the iPad and iPhone because the app had to be adapted for the Mac. And so there's a lot of benefits that came along with that for the iPad and iPhone. And a big part of that is a lot of the files integration. This episode of App Stories and all of our WWDC coverage is brought to you by Raycast. It's time for you to say goodbye to Spotlight and say hello to Raycast. Raycast is a native Mac super tool that eclipses and extends Spotlight's functionality. With the press of a keyboard shortcut, Raycast launches apps and a whole lot more. You can do all sorts of things. You can search for and access your files. You can use third-party apps and services like Google Workspace, GitHub, Jira, Asana, Linear, and a whole bunch more. You can schedule and join Zoom meetings with a single keystroke and start, schedule, and join Zoom meetings too. Access your clipboard, set reminders, take a quick note, and even control system functions on your Mac. Just the other day, Raycast also launched a new WWDC extension in collaboration with Guy Rambo, who makes the app WWDC for macOS. For watching the video sessions, the extension lets you quickly find this year's sessions and watch them in the WWDC app. Raycast also supports quick links, which is a feature that lets you open files, folders, and URLs, and you can pass in input. So you can do things like search for search terms in a browser, for instance. I've set one up specifically for MacStories, which is really great. The app uses a snippet system now, too, eliminating repetitive typing, allowing you to do things like send canned emails or drop frequently used code into an IDE, or even grab your company's brand colors if you've got those stored on your machine. Raycast is extensible with scripts too. In fact, it has an active user group that has created more than 400 scripts to control apps like Bear, CleanShot, Craft, and Things. On top of that, you can control things like Apple Music and Spotify, or even set your Slack status. Because Raycast is native, it behaves exactly how you'd expect it to. It's fast and responsive, and focused on your privacy. Together, Raycast's powerful features keep you focused on what matters most. You avoid inefficient context switching and eliminate clutter. Download Raycast for free right now by going to raycast.com to give it a try and level up your productivity. Again, that URL is raycast.com to download Raycast for free. Our thanks to Raycast for supporting our WWDC coverage this year.
Before we talk about, I know you want to say a few things about Safari for Mac, John. I just wanted to mention QuickNote. So QuickNote is again one of the fascinating additions to iPadOS and macOS this year. So QuickNote is this new feature of the Notes app that lets you capture a quick note. I mean, it's right there in the name.
Right.
Anywhere you are in the system, you can open this quick note, which is like, imagine if Picture-in-Picture and Apple Notes had a baby.
Yeah, it's very much like that.
Quick Note.
Yes.
That would be quick, right? Quick Note is a Picture-in-Picture like floating box that lets you capture text or images or links, anything, or drawings with the pencil, anything that you can put in a note. This is a floating panel that you can invoke anywhere in iPadOS and macOS. And in iPadOS is a fantastic example of the kind of feature that embraces the multiple input nature of iPadOS. In fact, I would say QuickNote is quite possibly the first sort of post-modularity feature of iPadOS. Like, it was built from the ground up with modularity in mind, because you can activate it via touch from Control Center.
Okay.
You can activate it with the pencil by swiping in from one corner of the screen.
All right.
And you can activate it with the keyboard by pressing the new Globe Q system-wide keyboard shortcut.
Nice.
So I think this is the first example of a new feature that, as a 1.0, it already supports all of the potential input methods on iPadOS.
You know what's interesting to me? I don't know if you remember this, but we heard rumors, it's got to be 3 years ago now, that Apple was working on marking up the web. You remember that? And we got the mark.
Oh, it's totally what it is.
That's what I thought so too. When I saw this, I remembered that, because it was not long after that we got the markup functionality, which is throughout the system. And this is really an extension of that in a lot of ways. I mean, it's not the same, but it's kind of related. The ideas are similar, and I think it's really going to be powerful for anybody doing research, especially because with Safari, which we'll talk about, and I do have a question for you about this in a second, but I've been playing around with it a little bit with Safari, and the ability to highlight a section of text on a web page and then add some of my own notes to it, and then be able to go back to that web page, not just to the web page, but to the exact location where I highlighted, and have the highlighting still there. That's huge for research. And what I wanted to ask you is, have you tried this at all with session videos?
No, I haven't. I haven't tried that. I tried highlighting from Safari, and it's nice because like you get this special snippet, right, in the quick note. So the quick note, you can resize it. Again, it's like picture-in-picture. You can throw it around the screen. You can hide it in, within the edge of the display, and you can make it bigger, smaller, whatever you want to do. But then when you highlight something on a page, you see the highlight
Right.
in the original web page, and you see this special rich link in the quick note, which is like a rich link that instead of an image, it shows you like a summary of the highlight.
Mm-hmm.
But what's fascinating about Quick Note is that it's yet another system feature that sort of piggybacks on the NS User Activity API.
Right, which seems like it does basically everything at this point, right?
NS User Activity, it powers
the share sheet,
handoff, the share sheet, spotlight search, reminders,
Siri intents, maybe
Siri shortcuts,
yeah,
multi-window and scenes on iPad. Right, it's an API that was launched in 2014 with iOS 8, and it's still allowing Apple to build new features on top of it.
Right,
and Quick Note is another one, because with Quick Note, it's not just that you can invoke the Quick Note panel and you can type stuff, or you can draw stuff, or you can save links and highlights. Essentially, Quick Note will show you an add link button for any application that supports NS User Activity.
Right.
So in any app where the developers have done the work to mark up a user activity, you will be able to add a dip link to that app. Basically, all the things that you can say to Siri, remind me about this,
right,
they will be supported in Quick Note. So this can be a location in Maps, a particular location in something like Yelp.
A task.
It can be a task. It can be an email message, right?
Yep.
All kinds of user activities can become deep links for Quick Note. And what's even nicer is that Quick Note, you can use it as a stack of sorts, meaning you can invoke the Quick Note and then you can start researching stuff, right? Or saving stuff across the system, across a variety of apps. So maybe you want to save a highlight from Safari, you do that,
right,
and it goes into the Quick Note. While the same Quick Note is still active, you can drop in a photo, or you can save a location from Maps, or you can save another highlight from a different web page. And all of those links, they get added to the same Quick Note.
Does that work?
And when you're done,
I was going to say, does that work even if you're using your apps in full screen? So it really is like picture in picture.
It doesn't matter.
Okay, so it's not like you have to. It's not like you have to have the two apps in split view or something like that. That's really
Quick
amazing.
Note is really like a picture in picture thing that is an overlay on top of whatever you're doing, and it captures whatever you're doing. And you can basically append links from different apps in a row. It doesn't matter. It saves all that you every time you tap the add link button, it saves that. What's even better, later, so let's say you prepare your Quick Note, it's saved in Notes. You see there's going to be a new section in the sidebar called Quick Notes.
Right.
Later, let's say that 2 days later, you reopen that location in Maps or that restaurant page in Yelp. When you do that, the system will show you, like you're going to see in the lower right corner of the screen on your device, you will see a little thumbnail slide in. And that's the Quick Note thumbnail. And if you tap that, the Quick Note will reappear. That's because the system knows that activity, that location, or that restaurant,
it's linked to that particular note.
Is linked to the Quick Note.
Right.
And it's surfacing that again. Same with highlights on web pages.
Let me ask you the $1 million question, since you've been deep into Obsidian the last several weeks.
Yeah.
How does this integrate if you are using Obsidian, for instance, or if Craft? If any of the listeners are using another system for their main note-taking service, how do you see these things integrating? Do you think this is the kind of thing where you'll just drop everything and move back into Notes for everything, or do you think they can complement each other?
Unfortunately, this does not integrate with Obsidian at all.
No, I'm sure
this
it doesn't.
This is an Apple Notes. It's an Apple Notes feature, and it's exclusive to Apple Notes,
right.
And there is no Quick Note API for developers to say, hey, what if I want to use Drafts or Craft as my Quick Note provider? That does not exist. It's not a thing this year. But so I've been thinking about this. This is very compelling. I could see myself using this a lot. But I still think that my custom system and the integration with files and shortcuts for Obsidian is too valuable for me at this point to give up. So I'm jealous, and I could see myself using this for, I don't know, when I'm doing a research for like a trip with Sylvia and we're gonna share a note,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm still gonna be using notes for sharing. This is great for that kind of stuff, right? Saving
Right.
a bunch of links and a bunch of photos very quickly. But for my kind of workflow where I can do the backlinks, backlinks are actually going to be like one key component of my review setup
Mm-hmm.
this year. We're gonna talk about all this over the coming weeks. But no, this is like I am jealous, and I wish it was like like an open API for developers, but it's not enough to bring me back. Now we could have this conversation again if Apple were ever to add like wiki style backlinking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're ever.
That
gonna do
doesn't seem
so.
like an Apple thing to do.
No.
But I do see this as something that, for instance, you and I we used to share a lot of notes in the Notes app. And then we kind of moved over to Craft. And that's where most of our shared stuff is now. And there isn't really necessarily a good way to do that with Obsidian, although you could probably put something together based on GitHub or something like that with a shared folder or something like that. But I could see going back to Notes for something like that, where you and I are planning some project and we have a bunch of links we want to share with each other and other research materials. And I think the idea that you said planning a trip with Sylvia, that I think that's a really good use case for this sort of thing, where you have another person involved in particular because of the sharing features in Notes.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, we can try it out this summer. I'm interested because I can tell you, I don't think anybody in my family is going to be into Quick Notes, so you're going to have to be my guinea pig for this when I test it out on the Mac, I think.
We can quick note each other.
Wow,
for sure.
That sounds exciting. Federico, let's move on to Safari. Why don't we talk a little bit about Safari? I think we probably are only going to scratch the surface here because there is a lot going on with the changes in Safari.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we should start from the Mac, which is where the most dramatic changes are. There's a whole conversation to be had about Safari on iPhone. I've been tweeting about it.
Right.
I'm not necessarily a fan at this point, but it feels to me like it's the kind of thing that could easily change by beta 2 or 3.
I think that's right.
Depending on user feedback.
I think that's right.
But tell me about the Mac though.
Well, look, I mean, the Mac has some of the same issues because one of the big aspects of the changes to Safari is a design change, and the philosophy is basically get all the tools out of the way, out of sight, right, and focus on the content. And that, on the surface, that sounds great. When you see a web page and you really don't see any Chrome at all you're seeing is the page. And the toolbar area, the address and tabs and all that has taken on the same color as the background of the website. It looks really beautiful. But when you use it, it's a problem if you're someone who is kind of a power user of Safari and needed to use a lot of tools like the share sheet or the settings or the bookmarks or whatever. A lot of that stuff is hidden now. And it's not deep.
Even on the Mac?
Yeah, it's not super deeply hidden, but it is kind of it's hidden enough that it's going to take some getting used to. And I will admit at this point I have not used it a lot. So, the jury's still out on this and I'm going to think about it some more, but it is a very different experience. Now, one thing that I'm intrigued by is tab groups. And tab groups live in the sidebar. There is like more of a modern sidebar in Safari now on the Mac that, you click the sidebar button and it reveals it, and you can get to things like your reading list there, but you can also get to tab groups. And tab groups are very similar to bookmarks. They'll be familiar to people in that sense because essentially they're groups of websites that you visited and saved into what is effectively a folder of websites, which sounds an awful lot like bookmarks, which it is. But being in the sidebar, I think the design choices and the idea is that these are maybe a little quicker to save, a little easier to access, a little faster to use, and that'll be a more lightweight thing that you will have lots of groups of tabs. Maybe you'll have one from a particular project where that got interrupted. You couldn't finish it that day, so you save all those tabs in a tab group, but the next morning you have to do some, maybe you're paying your bills or something, and you don't need to have all those tabs from your project the day before open. You can have a separate set of, these are my bill paying tabs where I can go and see, my bank account and other things like that. And that kind of thing can kind of be recreated in folders of bookmarks, but in the side, it's not only available in this sidebar, but there's also ways to get to it from the tabs themselves by clicking on a little down arrow that opens up a list of your tab groups. So you click on one of those and it opens them all up. Now these tabs, when you save them, it's like bookmarks. They're not open in the background, so you're not consuming necessarily a lot of resources. Safari's been pretty good about managing resources in the background for multiple years now, but that's kind of how it works. And I like it conceptually. I mean, I think the idea is interesting. I'm not sure. I really need to live with it and do some research on, like, when I'm doing a project or something for a story I'm writing, to see whether in practice I actually take the time to make tab groups, or whether I do what I've always done, which is I just have a lot of tabs open. But they sync across all your devices, but that's true of bookmarks and things like that too. So I'm not. I like the idea conceptually. Whether in practice it actually sticks is another matter altogether.
Yeah, and a lot of these issues are also on iOS and iPadOS.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I like a lot of the things, like, for example, the customizable start page, even though I don't really care about some of the new sections, like the shared with you section.
Yeah,
I think if possible, I'm going to disable it.
You can on the Mac. I haven't looked on iOS.
On iOS too.
Yeah.
I disabled it in iOS. I think I'm loving the fact that web extensions are coming to iOS and iPadOS, right?
Right.
So this is going to be one of the hot new categories for apps this year. And those extensions, those are the same ones that you can install in desktop browsers.
They're not one-to-one compatible necessarily, though. I understand.
Sure, but like the features that are not compatible are things like persistent background pages,
right?
Stuff like that. But the real, like, 1Password can make a browser extension.
Sure.
You can install browser extensions that totally change your start page, right? You can use a custom start page via an extension, like Momentum. I think it's one of the popular ones. So that I really like. But everything else, this campaign against visible buttons.
Well, it's funny because there are a bunch of sessions that are all about buttons in this WWDC too, which I thought was kind of funny.
When it's for other developers, buttons are fine. The problem is for built-in apps made by Apple, it seems. And I don't know, it feels like I've been using iOS 15 for 3 days, and then I grabbed my one of my old iPhones running iOS 14, and I looked at Safari, and it was really nice with all those handy, convenient buttons like navigation arrows and bookmarks and share and tabs, and in the toolbar, a reload button and controls for Safari Reader and website settings. I don't know. I just feel like, is it really that important to get rid of convenient UI elements for the sake of minimalism, for the sake of having this floating toolbar at the bottom of the screen on iPhone? And if it's only an iPhone problem, then why do the iPad and the Mac, devices with plenty of horizontal space, also remove all those buttons?
Right. No, and I
don't get it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've got to live in this, as I said, for a while, but I don't like having things that I use all the time hidden away, even if it's only one extra click. And the share sheet, to me, having that behind a button really bothers me because there's nothing I share more than links on the web, and I guess that's because what we do. But I send things to my read later service, or I send things via messages, or I email something, whatever it is. I'm constantly using that share sheet, and now it's hidden behind a button, which I really don't like that very much.
Remember when we used to wish for Reading List to become a standalone app? Good times.
Yeah, it's still
there.
It's still there.
Not only did it not get any updates, and it didn't become a standalone app either, but it's also harder to get to now.
Yeah,
because on iPhone, there's a bookmarks button that's sitting all by itself at the top of the screen, and I don't know.
Yeah, it's the iPhone's a whole different discussion because the iPad and the Mac share a lot of common UI elements on Safari, but the iPhone with the address bar and tabs and things being along the bottom, I like the idea of being able to reach these things easily, but it's definitely very different from any other browser I've ever used. All right, Federico, that's another good episode. It's going to be fun digging into all this stuff over the summer, and I don't know. I think our opinions of some of this will evolve, especially the software is going to evolve. So we'll have to keep everybody abreast of what's going on throughout the rest of the summer and into the fall. But I want to thank our sponsor again for WWDC. That is Raycast. You can find me and Federico over at MacStories. Federico is at Viticci on Twitter and Instagram. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHN VOORHWS. Talk to you tomorrow, Federico.
Ciao, John.